here. I've come to a couple of these. I'm so flattered to have the opportunity and so delighted to be able to work with our collaborators in LSC. We've been working for a couple of years now we were working with Kane and Kate and Emily and now Anne and of course Heisler and Dominique. And one of the things that I hope I will convey today is that the kinds of public engagement activities that we have over at Discovery are not only great for the public, but they're great for the people presenting, so the ones on the other side of the table or the lectern, but also hopefully great for people like you as fodder for research that get at interesting questions. And that's really the case I want to make today, is that science festivals in particular are just waiting to be studied. There's a lot of activity, they're global in scope, they're universal in appeal, and there's very little research on them. So I'll talk a little bit about the origin of science festivals, the origin of our science festival here in Wisconsin, and tell you a little bit about the scope of that. I'm hoping you've heard of it, but maybe you haven't, so after today it better be on your calendars. Next festival is November 2nd through 5th, so I hope to see you there. And then I'll talk a little bit about some national scale efforts to begin to study how these festivals make a difference to the public, to presenters, and beyond. And then turn things over to Kate to talk about some things that the team here in LSC has been asking and learning about the Wisconsin Science Festival as an example. So we'll try and take it up to about, if it's okay with you, about 1:45 or so, and leave time for questions. I'll try and stop around 12:30 to give Kate some time, but we'll just sort of see how it goes. So Dominique mentioned the Discovery Building. I'm guessing everyone's been over there because it's the best coffee in this part of campus. Everybody knows the building. I don't know if you know it's very complicated institutionally. I don't have slides on this, but I'll just explain. Basically, there are three organizations that occupy that building. Obviously, the building is called the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery. It's super confusing because one of the entities that it houses is called the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. So I'm guessing most of you know the building as WID. But actually that's kind of a little confusing because WID is actually just one of the institutes in the building, so we've tried to rename the building and try to do a culture change on campus and call it the Discovery Building. So I always call it the Discovery Building so that it doesn't get confused with WID. So for what it's worth, if you come away with nothing else, at least you'll know that WID is only one of three parts of that building. Very important part, but there's more. There's also the Morgridge Institute for Research, which is a private nonprofit basic research institute. And those two entities basically are twins. They occupy the research floors upstairs, and they're really meant to be sort of co-equal partners and to cross-pollinate one another's research. They have very different models. Somewhat overlapping, but also different research foci, subject for another talk. And then the whole ground floor is what we call the town center, as Dominique mentioned. And that and the whole building actually are managed by my organization, which is WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, which is the patent office for the campus, but also an investor in most of the newer buildings on campus. Anything older than 90 years old has been in part paid for by WARF, and with respect to the Discovery Building, WARF took a very different role and actually major finance and then manages the building on behalf of the campus and the other partners. And we manage the town center, and so I have a staff of 11 people. Some of them work for WARF, some of them work for Morgridge. We manage all the events that take place over there, so if you ever book that forum or you go to an event in the forum, that round room, that's my staff that's making that all go. And then we put on a number of program series, some of them aimed at K-12 students, so we have field trip programs, we have after-school programs, we have a Saturday science program, we have programs aimed at the campus community and adults, and in fact we have an event tomorrow that will feature the new director of WID, and now you know that WID is different from the building, Jo Handelsman, talking about some of her research interests in a series called The Crossroads of Ideas. We have series on entrepreneurship, we have series on the complexities of technology commercialization, and we have the Science Festival, which is our biggest, baddest event to take place once a year and started the year that the building opened in 2011. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where we're anchored. So now we'll just turn and talk about what I want to try and cover here. I'm really standing in the way of my slides. How can I do this better?
It's okay, you can stay there.
But then I need to click.
Move it, just move up.
Oh, will it really? Okay, sorry.
It's okay.
Will it go all the way? Okay. Is that better? Can people see something? Okay, sorry. So give you a sense of science festivals, what's going on with them, our festival, and then a little bit of data, and then turn things over to Kate for even more and better data. So festivals can arguably, I'll make the case that festivals began with this hallowed event that takes place at the Royal Institution in London called their Christmas Lectures. And are any of you familiar with these Christmas lectures? Carl Sagan gave these still go on. So, you know, this modern day, this was the year before Carl Sagan. I couldn't find a good photo of Carl Sagan giving one. I found videos, but that didn't translate well. So anyway, they're alive, they're well, they're vibrant, and really sort of set the stage for the public being brought into a research environment to hear about science that was fascinating. And they have, the fact that they've been going for about 150 years really is a testament to the potential of engaging the public in science in a science venue. Our very own Bassam Shakashiri is an acolyte of the Christmas lectures. He does his own very famous Christmas lecture. I'm guessing most of you know The Science is Fun. This is actually in the summertime on the terrace. And we feel a direct lineage to those lectures now known as Faraday lectures because Bassam was actually inspired by them and by one of his mentors, Carl Sagan, to start his Science is Fun. And he in turn seeded the original idea for the Wisconsin Science Festival that we then picked up as the Discovery Building was open as a perfect moment in time to start a Wisconsin Science Festival. We had the Discovery Building, we had the idea from Bassam, so I think that's a straight line to those Faraday lectures. I'm going to make that case anyway. And the other real strong influence that helped science festivals get off the ground actually came from the world of festivals in general. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with the city of Edinburgh, Scotland, but it's kind of known as the festival capital of Europe. They really prided themselves. They have a number of prominent festivals. They have a strong film festival, a number of things. And they were quite chagrined in, I think it was 1989, when Glasgow got the title as the culture capital of Europe, and Edinburgh was not happy about that. And they decided to fight back and create yet another festival. So they created a science festival and began, to add to their festival culture just another strand of things to complement everything else they had going, art, film, etc. And from that time, other cities, first in the UK and then across Europe, got excited about science festivals as well, because the very first one in Edinburgh was a huge hit. And so now there are science festivals all over Europe. This is a recent shot. There's actually an organization that pulls all of these science festivals in Europe together as a confederation. We have a similar one in the US that I'll mention in a moment. I don't know how many there are, but there are a lot, and growing. And to my knowledge, none of the festivals across the world, science festivals that have started, has actually failed. So they just there doesn't seem to be an exit strategy. They just are propagating and multiplying. The science festivals in the UK actually inspired John Durant, who is the president of the MIT Museum and editor, I think, of Science Communication, or a number of journals, to create a Cambridge Science Festival in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's confusing because there's also a Cambridge Science Festival in Cambridge, England, and he's actually British, so there's confusion, but nobody better to do it. So he started the Cambridge Science Festival in 2009, and that's going strong. And then he had the vision to create a parallel to that European Public Science Event Society called the Science Festival Alliance here in the US, and that entity now helps coordinate and share information among US science festivals. So this is a snapshot from, I think this is a current counting of the number of science festivals in the US. It's more than 50. So it started with Cambridge. We were in that sort of first wave. I believe we were the 10th festival in the US in Wisconsin when we started in 2011. We've actually been involved in helping to mentor and launch new festivals across the country. And this group gets together annually. Actually, this year they're getting together at the Discovery Building in June, so if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share information about that conference. Should be very interesting. Dieter and Dominique are going to be there presenting, as well as the graduate students we're working with on this team in LSC. But just suffice to say that science festivals are growing, they have momentum, they're not dying. Pretty much everywhere they start, they thrive. So it's a growing movement. A recent statistic that I just saw this morning estimates that in 2016, more than 2.6 million people attended science festivals around the world. So you get a sense of the magnitude and scope of this movement, and really all tracing its origins back to those Faraday lectures. So let me just give you a little bit of background on what we're talking about when we talk about science festivals. Who are they for? In general, like festivals like in Edinburgh, like a film festival or other festivals you might be familiar with, they're for the general public, people who self-identify as interested in this general target. And maybe more than festivals like film festivals, they tend to be very focused on attracting kids and families, but not exclusively. And that's how they may differ from you know, from carnival type events or science museum type events. They're not just for kids, and we'll have events in pubs, there are events in tattoo parlors, all aimed at engaging the public very broadly. So not every single event within a festival is for every audience member, but really trying to engage the public. Yes, this is an old number, this 3.5 million, it's up to, over 24. So I wonder if that's, science events. Okay, so the 2.6 is science festivals. There are a number of other public science events, science cafes, etc. across the world, so that's what that 3.5 million refers to. So you get the sense that there's a lot of people participating in these public science activities. Festivals in general, when we talk about a science festival in the field, we tend to be talking about a happening that occurs once a year and features a number of different events. So we call it sort of multifaceted. All science festivals seem to be characterized by having something that we refer to as like an expo or a carnival. We have Arts at Discovery in the town center, so if you were to walk in during the science festival, you would see about 1,500 people and about 60 what we call exploration stations or tables like this, where on one side there's what we call a STEM professional, could be a grad student, could be a faculty member, could be someone from a company, could be some volunteers who have been trained to talk about a particular kind of content, something on the table for people to engage with or watch or touch, and then members of the public. So we'll have about 60 exploration stations and about 1,500 people, and we call that the expo. There can also be live shows during your expo, there can be art, but that seems to be a hallmark of all science festivals. And it's not that it's a written rule, it's just that that really works. It's a great way of getting a lot of people to engage in a lot of different things. At Cambridge and MIT, the whole Malone corridor that runs down the middle of MIT just has tables and things all across it, as well as that underground tunnel that they have if anybody's been to MIT. So they have several floors of expo. Where? So the where they take place really depends. Each festival has its own character. Ours is university-based, and we have a lot of activities here on campus, and we have a lot of activities around the state, and I'll show you some of that in a moment. Sometimes they have nothing to do with the university. They might be at a science center or museum. Others come together completely in a completely different way. Maybe there's schools involved. Maybe there's a restaurant that wants to be the hub of it. They're just, really there's no rules. And as more festivals come alive, more different kinds of venues tend to become the anchor. I would say science centers, universities are often associated with them, but not necessarily. It's really an organic process. I think we're still learning what the sort of normalizing structure is. And I believe that this slide says, and I believe it's true, that festivals are taking place on 6 continents. I've shown a couple here, and I think I have another slide. Yeah, just some that I found. Africa, South America, Australia, of course Europe, the US. Asia, so they are growing. There was actually one at the first conference I went to on science festivals in 2011 from Egypt. It was right in the wake of the Egypt Spring. They had started a science festival in the midst of all of that tumult, and it was really well received. Probably not still happening, but it was exciting at the time. Again, they tend to take place annually. There's a famous USA Science and Engineering Festival that takes place on the Mall in DC. That takes place every other year, so that's certainly a model. But they tend to have a time-limited frame. Some of them, the Arizona Science Festival has a whole month, and they capture baseball spring training, so their numbers are really big because they count everybody who goes to spring training games, which is nice for them. We've been trying to get ours to cover a Packer game or something, but the Phillies, they're at the Philadelphia Science Festival. They have the first pitch thrown out by a robot in baseball season, and they count everybody in the stadium as part of their attendance, so that's nice. They take place generally once a year, generally in the fall and spring. Again, there's exceptions. There's a bunch of them in Florida that are taking place right now because they can. And then how, and I mentioned this. So they generally have a lead institution, often a museum or university, but not necessarily. There's actually a law firm in Minnesota that is starting one in Minnesota, so that's another model. They tend to be very collaborative, and our festival, we have about 40 organizations that partner to make it happen. We have 3 lead institutions, so WARF, Mortgage Institute for Research, and of course University of Wisconsin-Madison, but we have events in 90 different venues and as many organizations involved. And then most of them require money to get the word out, to pay for food for volunteers, to pay for venues, to pay for supplies, etc. So that just gives you a sense, hopefully. And then the why, and this is really where the conversation with you comes in. What motivates people to participate? What are the impacts? What are the benefits? And these are all the things that are beginning to be poked at and tested and the subject of research, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. But as you can see, there are more than 10,000 STEM practitioners a year participating in these events, millions of people attending them, and opportunities to ask questions about motivations, impacts, effects, attitudes, etc. Just some of the numbers, and all of this information can be found on the Science Festival Alliance website. Science Festival Alliance, again, is U.S. festivals, so more than, again, this year, 2.6 million SFA members or U.S. festivals, people participating at those festivals. The numbers in red are the numbers that we've had at the Wisconsin Science Festival, so we typically run above about 35,000, 37,000. Number of total events, more than 4,000 individual events in the U.S. Our festival typically has between 200, 285 was the 2015 number. And you can get a sense of the size. Some of these are really small. They're one day, they're in a small community. Others of these are a month long, and then everything in between. There's a Bay Area Science Festival that is, San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland. It's huge, right? It runs for 2 weeks. That's a lot of people. Others of them are one afternoon in Arkansas at a small museum there. So it gives you a sense of the scope. And then just some more numbers. So again, the scope of budgets, some of these are really small affairs. Some of these have $1 million. The North Carolina Science Festival has a $1 million endowment and a major partnership with a major media outlet. So again, the range of scales. Our festival, we spend about $30,000 on marketing, just so you have a sense of it. Our total budget is usually about $90,000 for everything that we need. So it gives you a sense of where we fall in the scope of these things. We have over 200 STEM professionals involved in making our festival go. We have over 200 volunteers, and that 66 is the number of collaborating organizations we had in 2015. So again, giving you a sense of where we fit in here in Wisconsin against the universe of festivals in the U.S. So I'll talk a little bit about our specific goals in Wisconsin. Dominique mentioned our first festival was in 2011. That was the first summer the Discovery Building was open. Again, the Sam Shakasheri had said it'd be great to have a Wisconsin Science Festival. So the group that he was appealing to said, well, let's do it in conjunction with the Discovery Building opening. Let's have UW-Madison involved. We got our other organizations involved. And we began to figure out sort of what could happen. And we had a very short lead time, so we just looked around for organizations in the community on campus that were already interested in having events. And we brought them together and said, let's create this. And our first year we had 3 days in September. We had over 5,000 people, and we were very happy with that. And we were sort of off to the races, and we began to put feelers out across the state. And we found out that children's museums across the state, libraries, other members of the UW system, other colleges and universities were also interested in having activities where they are. And so the second year we had about a dozen locations outside of Madison, as well as a lot of activities on campus, and close to 20,000 people. And then it grew very organically from that to the place where we are now. I believe this, oh shoot, I had a, I'm going to just advance for a second, sorry. So this gives you a sense of where we are now. So last year we were in 33 cities, and on the right you can see the distribution of where people came from over the last few years to participate. So generally about half of the participants have made it to our expo at the Discovery Building and other events that we have there. Others are taking part in activities all around the UW-Madison campus, a number of things in the Geology Museum, for example, the Dairy Barn, Babcock, a lot of sites that have cool things to experience will open their doors during the Science Festival. And then across Madison, we have Old Brick Gardens, the Madison Children's Museum, a lot of the kinds of places you would imagine. And then statewide, and this has been the interesting story the last few years, is to watch interest take off around Wisconsin. So as you can see, more and more cities. What we're seeing more and more is that different cities across the state are creating their own festival within the festival. So I think I have that here, a number of new expos. So these carnival-like events in small communities. Scandinavia, Iowa had a first-time expo. UW Stout had a first-time expo. Bayfield, far up in the northwestern corner of the state, has an expo. And we expect that this trend to continue as the festival grows in impact and traction. I'm going to go back now and give you a sense of the kinds of events that we have. Let me go back one more. Oh, there we go. So what I put in here is just some images from various festivals that we've had, so you can get a sense of the kinds of events that you're likely to experience. So on the left, from our very first festival, we had a big opening at Memorial Union Theater, and we had a dance with a robot and Christopher Walker's dance troupe, and they danced. You can see some of the dancers and the robot, and they did this human-robot dance, which was fascinating. We also had a young man put on a suit of lights, and then everyone in the audience had refracting glasses so they could see rainbows as he was dancing. So very much an arts component, arts and science coming together in ways that are sometimes juxtapositions, sometimes truly integrated. We took activities to the football game and had people test their reflexes, learn things about throwing a perfect spiral, really understanding the science of football. So part of the hallmark of a successful festival is really surprising people about where science can be found in the course of things that they experience every day. Food and science is a very popular thing. We always have a chocolate event, and we have a researcher from biochemistry who talks about the chemistry of chocolate, and that's always extremely popular, as you can imagine. And then these are some images from the expo, so you get a sense of really participatory, hands-on activities, looking at microscopes, scanning in a giant bubble, all the kinds of things that you could imagine that everybody would be interested in. And then events for adults as well. So we had our artistic events, this live reenactment of, this was 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, up in the upper right. Maybe people recognize Ben Sidran and Richie Davidson talking about the interface of neuroscience and jazz. Deborah Blum, who sadly has left UW-Madison, but appears at a lot of science festivals around the country, talking about poison in literature, and Sean Carroll, now their Cal's researcher, talking about his book called Brave Genius. So, you know, a range of things we partner with the Wisconsin Book Festival. You get the idea. Okay, so now I want to move on. As I mentioned, we have a lot of objectives in having these. Partly is just to help people find science to be interesting and have fun. Science is a public endeavor. We want the public to feel like they're connected to it. But we also want to understand what impact these kinds of events have on presenters, on institutions, on attitudes. And this is beginning to get at the research component of festivals and what's possible. And so we are part of a 24-site, 5-year study funded by the National Science Foundation called EvalFest, designed to develop new instruments for measuring the impact of science festivals on publics, on presenters, etc. So we're starting year 3 of this study, so we have 2 years worth of data, trying to get at attitudes, motivations, experiences, and there's a lot more to come on this, and we'll be talking about some of this in June at that conference I mentioned that's taking place here at Discovery. But I'll show you just some of the data that's come out of EvalFest, and I've cherry-picked a little bit, just some of the interesting questions and outputs. Hopefully you can see some of the things we're getting at, and then I'll turn things over to Kate. And some of these questions are pretty connected. So we obviously asked them demographic information. And what you can see here is we've looked at all the different expos in our festival. So we had expo in Rock County, Bayfield, Stout. We had a daytime expo, and then we had an evening activity that we called Arcade. So we looked across all of these expos and tried to get a sense of who's coming. And perhaps not surprisingly, a lot of people who are, you might suspect, the usual suspects who self-identify as interested in science. So people with a fair amount of education, but a distribution. And then it looks a little bit different at the different locations. And then getting to motivations, and I think Kate has more data on this. Our hypothesis has been that a lot of people come to the festival because they want to support their kids, and that was borne out this year in response to this question. This was the first year that we asked this question as part of Eval Fest. But the answers are a little bit different at different sites and for different events. So the Arcade in Orange is an evening event that was primarily attracting adults. There were kids, but there were also a lot of adults. Versus the blue is our Discovery Expo. So you can see some different ratios there. The daytime event obviously much more for people with kids, as you can see here. And you know, at the UW Stout is a campus, so they're not necessarily the same. You know, it's drawing campus. We think it's drawing more UW Stout students than kids, and so we're seeing a different distribution. So you can just begin to see there are different motivations depending on the site. This is the first year of these data. We haven't really begun to find correlations, but we're getting started. People generally seem to like these, so we usually like one person, two people who wouldn't recommend it in 2015 to someone else. I think they just do that to be cantankerous. But for the most part, these things are, the people who are there are having a good time. That's really what we have learned about this. And I think everyone is happy to see that the festivals seem to have some impact on people's interest and interest in STEM. There's some questions that get at, are you more aware of STEM in your daily life as a part of coming to these? And the answers generally tend to be yes. And then, do you interact with a STEM professional? So this is also interesting because a lot of people don't feel that they do. There's a lot of questions around how do you define a STEM professional. A lot of people don't feel like they do in their daily lives, but they do when they come to the event. There's some evidence that says that people's experience of public science events is how much they take away from it, how positively impacted they are, is directly correlated to whether or not they interacted with a STEM professional. So there's a strong effort to have there be a lot of STEM professionals as opposed to maybe volunteers who themselves don't work in STEM. And this year for the Eval Fest study, everybody actually had the STEM professional self-identify with a button that says, hi, I'm Kate and I work in social science, or so trying to really let people know who they are and drive home the point, yeah, you're talking to a STEM professional when you're talking to me. Feel free to recognize who I am. And I don't know if you've seen lately, there's also a hashtag movement to try and identify, like, I think it's like I'm a real hashtag I'm a real scientist, trying to drive home that scientists aren't different kinds of people that don't look like us. They're all around, and so really trying to push that. And I'm thinking that this year at Science Festivals we'll all be working more on more of that identity and breaking down those barriers through festivals. But there's certainly the potential and the opportunity to do that. And then finally, festivals are also trying to make the case, the economic impact case for public science events, trying to connect to goals that municipalities and states might have to have their populations understand the extent to which their area is a strong STEM participant. So we asked the question if it helped you understand that Wisconsin is a strong STEM state, and obviously the answer is yeah, this helped me understand that Wisconsin is a strong STEM state. So there's that potential. Everyone that runs a festival calculates the economic impact, again, to make funders and stakeholders happy, and this fits into that equation as well. So I think with that, this is just some demographics. I think Kate has much more on this, so I think I'll turn things over to you now to dive in because you have more information on these lines, so I will let you come on up and
So what I'm focusing on today is that we looked at the impacts of one specific engagement event that took place at the 2015 Science Festival, and that was a panel on human gene editing. And so, yeah, as we mentioned before, this was in collaboration with Laura, and then also we have a couple graduate students in here who worked on stuff. So this was, the basis for looking at this is why do we want to study science communication events? And so we know that science is complex, it's becoming more politicized, it's becoming more controversial, and there are widespread societal implications for a lot of the new science and technology advances that are happening if you think about GMOs or gene editing. And so with that in mind, we really have to involve members of the public in making these decisions about the future of these technologies as they're going to impact everyone. So with that in mind, there was also a little bit of a lack of the current literature looking at the impacts of specific engagement events. I can talk about it a little bit more later, I think, but really the problem was that the current literature looks at describing what these events were more so than looking at the actual impact that it had on participants. So the research question we were asking is, what types of engagement mechanisms for controversial scientific issues are successful in real world settings? And so in doing this, we had to look at who is the audience, who was coming to these events, who were we actually directly reaching, and then also looking at a way to methodically test the impact of an event to make up for, or to help with the current lack. So there are a couple different approaches to science communication. A lot of the previous ways that people approached it were from a public understanding with science perspective. And so in this perspective, it really focused on one-way communication, so it was an expert talking to the public. So there are these 4 models. The first one is a knowledge deficit, and that was really grounded in a public understanding. So it was based on the idea that if you give people more information, they're automatically going to support science. The next model is the contextual model, and that pulls a little bit away from that perspective, but it's still really grounded in it. And so in this model, it also took into account that in order to effectively communicate with people, you have to really ground the information in things that are important to them, so providing context for things that are relevant to the people that you're communicating with. The next model, delay expertise, again pulls a little bit further away, and this also takes into account that members of the public have knowledge and have things that they know and understanding that can help contribute to things, so it gives a little bit more of an authority to members of the public to know what's going on and to help with the decision making and things that are, and for future of science. And then we really get to the public engagement model. So in this model, it focuses on 2-way forms of communication and public involvement. So not only are members or people who are considered experts talking to the public, but members of the public are really having an input, and it involves dialogue and conversation and interaction between these types of people with a number of different outcomes. And so the events are really based in either decision making or dialogue based. And so in decision making, these are things like citizen juries, where you have members of the public who come in, you recruit members of the public to come in to an event. And in this event, they're usually given some base information, and then you have experts who come in and present additional information to them. And members on the panel of the citizen jury are then able to ask experts questions, and then they go and deliberate. And after they deliberate and discuss different issues, and they can call back experts to talk to them more if they need to. But at the end of this is a policy outcome. Usually they have a report where they think that the future direction of this scientific issue, so there are things like gene editing, or GMOs have also had a number of these. And so there would be, like, whether it's at the city level or the state level. So people will come in and say that this citizen jury will have the outcome of saying that we think that in this area the technology should or should not move forward, and also what types of things about the technology that they're worried about. So there's really a direct policy impact. And so we also have dialogue-based events, and these are events, and this is what we're going to talk about too with the panel, where it's really focused on people talking with each other, experts, members of the public, everyone talking to each other and figuring out where these joint areas of concern are. So as I said, the outcomes can be a direct policy outcome. There can also be scientific issue meaning construction, and that's really where the dialogue base comes in and people are talking about it. And then there's also, you can also have an outcome which is a little bit less direct, where you hope that when you have the groups of people coming and talking together, then later on, if they're going to be making policy or having any sort of influence, then they have a little bit more of a broader perspective. So to give a little background on the panel, so gene editing is a process which allows scientists to change DNA directly by adding, replacing, or removing parts of the DNA. So this technology has been around for a little while, but with new developments, including CRISPR-Cas9 and other tools, it allows the technology, or allows the DNA to be changed much more precisely in a much more cost-effective way. And so that's really had the impact of speeding up, and also increasing what we think that the technology can do. So the event took place, like I said, at the 2015 Wisconsin Science Festival. And so it was a human gene editing panel. And the panel was called Design Your Genes, Should We Be Able to Edit Our Genome? So this panel was set up, there were 4 panelists and 1 moderator, and they were from a mixture of science and social science backgrounds. In total, we had 125 attendees, and the panel was set up by having 30 minutes for panel presentations, and then members of the audience could ask technical-based questions, and then an hour was devoted to a discussion section. So people from the audience could ask questions and to discuss different issues, bring up areas of concern for them with the technology. So in figuring out how to evaluate these types of events, we came up with this framework. And so what it's really focusing on is putting the engagement activity in perspective. So we have to know the broader engagement context and the broader social context. And this gets back to knowing who your audience is and who's actually coming to these events. So if you have members, a specific subset of members of the audience who are coming to the event, which is what we know happens, like Laura was talking about, there are people who are inherently interested in science. And so if your goal is to change everyone's perspective, then that might not happen because of your audience who's coming is already a subset. And this also gets at the importance of setting what your goal is that you set. So again, you can't have an impact unless you have a goal. Otherwise, you can't really evaluate what it is that you're doing. So with that in mind, the context, the Wisconsin Science Festival audience. So again, this is getting at preaching to the choir. We know that people who are coming to this event are inherently interested in science. And so we also wanted to look at other differences across them, and so we did a comparison between the 2015 Wisconsin Science Festival attendees, and we had a 2015 survey, representative survey of Wisconsin residents. And so we looked across a number of different variables to see what the differences were. So we have age, gender, college degree, political ideology, how deferent they are to science, and this is a concept that really gets at how much people trust information that comes from science and from scientists. So we also have media attention, trust in university scientists, corporations, religious organizations, and regulatory agencies. So the significant differences between the groups in everything except for trust in regulatory agencies. So the people who are attending the Wisconsin Science Festival tend to be younger, they are more males, they are more educated, they tend to have a college degree compared to Wisconsin residents. They tend to be more liberal compared to Wisconsin residents. They also tend to be more deferent to science, so again, this is getting at the inherent trust in the inherent appreciation of science. They pay more attention to government and political news, and they also have more trust in university scientists and less trust in corporations and religious organizations. So within that context, we are evaluating the panel. So the panel, as I already described, had a bunch of panelists, and so in order to measure this in a really systematic way, we had a pre and post test. So we surveyed people coming in to the panel, and then we surveyed people leaving. And so this means that we have different samples, but we implemented what's called a random intercept design. So we set a protocol. Every fifth person to pass the surveyor, they grab that person to survey. So we have 34 people in the pre-test, 26 people in the post-test. So the goal of the panel was to increase basic knowledge about human gene editing and also to increase risk and benefit perceptions in order to help people have a more broad understanding of the complexity of gene editing and also to help get an idea of moral concerns and to help maybe help people make more informed decisions. So we have a couple different measures, and I can talk, and they'll show up on the next slide too, but our measure of knowledge is really perceived knowledge. So there's two ways you can really approach knowledge. There's a factual knowledge, asking people true-false questions to see if they can get them right or wrong. and then asking people how like comfortable, how familiar, how informed they think they are. And so this is really more of a measure of, of people's level of comfort with an issue, so how much they think that they know about it. Risk and benefit perceptions. So what we're looking for is that they're based on previous research that has shown that if you give people more information, it's not that they think that things are automatically more beneficial or automatically more risky. Usually it's a combination of both. And so that makes it not that they're going to necessarily support it more if you give them more information, which is based in the knowledge deficit model, but instead it's really getting at more, people might feel more ambiguous about it. So they have more knowledge about negative aspects and positive aspects. And then also in terms of morality and ethics, we were really looking at the acceptability of controversial science. So there are measures. And then we found significant differences in their level of knowledge, how much risk to society and benefits to society they perceived, and then their moral acceptability of the technology. So the panel did increase their knowledge. They all saw more risks and more benefits, so again, getting at that ambiguous and understanding of the higher complexity of the issue. And then they found the technology to be more morally acceptable after the panel. So overall, again, this is getting at that you have to have engagement activities in context. You have to know who the audience is that you're actually reaching, and you also have to understand what your goals are in order to look for an effect. There's also a need for more systematic evaluation to test public engagement with science events, and Laura was also mentioning this too. There really needs to be, if we're going to promote these types of events, we have to show that they can have an impact and they are doing anything. And then, so what we found based on our study was that public engagement events can have an impact, and this is in terms of people's comfort with an issue, in terms of their perceived knowledge, and then also in terms of their complexity of thinking. So we raised risk and benefit perceptions, indicating that people might have a more nuanced approach to the issue, and then also increased moral acceptability. That's all I have.
I'll just add just a couple more points, and then
Sure.
maybe Dave can.
Do you want to go back to it?
Yeah. So thank you very much, Kate. That really set the stage, actually. So I'll just finish on this
And you
slide.
can leave some minutes for questions.
Definitely, I will. Just two more points I want to make. So, as Kate mentioned, was true in 2015, continues to be true not just for us. All festivals struggle with who's coming, how do we reach more people, and then have conversations and activities at these festivals that are relevant to different people so that we truly begin to build impact. So, everybody's festival profile pretty much looks like this. Up in Bayfield, actually, they're in the midst of a strong Native American population. This is actually, I was just talking today to the PI of the About Fest study who said, tell me more about that. That's really fantastic. So there's more to look at there. This year, in terms of where we hope to go, some of our goals include going more to where people are and identifying different people who haven't been coming. So maybe having more Science on Tap events in pubs, having events around fishing and hunting and different topics of interest across the state to bring in a more diverse population, diversity across all measures. And then also getting into issues of absolute societal import like climate change, like the question about whether or not research should be publicly funded. And so we're going to be looking to tee up some of those kinds of questions with broader audiences this year by going more to where people are. And that's a nice thing about science festivals, is that there aren't really that many rules. And there's a lot of room to experiment with different modalities, different venues, different ways of bringing people in and having conversations. And I think the real impact then comes if we can have these kinds of studies like what Kate and her colleagues put together and bring that information back to potential funders, stakeholders, and future participants and presenters. So that's kind of where the festival movement broadly is heading and where we are heading in Wisconsin. And so with that, I'm just going to do some obligatory additional resources, some of the things I mentioned. So we have our own Science Festival website where more information about our festival appears and where you can find out about this year's 200 plus events that we'll have, the About Fest study, and then the Science Festival Alliance I mentioned, that confederation of U.S. science festivals. And then finally, just there's too many people to acknowledge, but it's really the team at LSC I want to flag, and then the various deans that have been involved in helping our festival go over the last few years, and tons of people on my staff, across the campus, thanking, of course, our funders at National Science Foundation, and then we have dozens of sponsors and volunteers that I can't list, but just to give you a sense that this is a huge effort that takes a lot of people to put on and a lot of people to study. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you for your attention.